Well, hello everyone. Our esteemed guest was in fact talking to a ghost, because I am bad at technology. But welcome, one and all, to Ludo History. As always, I am Adam, and I am joined today by Emma Yasui, and someone who knows far more about prehistoric Japan than I do, so I am unbelievably excited. Would you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Emma Yasui. I am, first of all, mixed Japanese Canadian and ended up in anthropology, which brought me into archaeology. And early in my undergrad, I wondered why I was hearing nothing about Japan. So decided to dedicate the next decade or so of my life to figuring out what was happening in Japan in terms of the past and archaeology, which of course intersects heavily with history in Japan. So, yeah, I became an expert on the Jomon period, particularly their food and stone technologies, and trying to figure out what daily social cultural life looked like in the past in northern Japan. I work in Hokkaido. Yeah.
It is. I am so unbelievably excited. For people who were watching previous streams, right, got a chance to look at the UNESCO World Heritage Site for those prehistoric sites of northern Japan as our like main archaeological body that we looked at on stream. So having someone who actually works with some of the same sites in Hokkaido is absolutely phenomenal. So I suppose, where do we want to start? Because there are so many different directions we can go here. So
Very,
actually,
very much. We already had like an hour-long conversation that went unrecorded.
yep. So I guess firstly, let's just thank everyone who's coming in. So Nameless Punk, Maraxa, Faith. Well, Faith and go in. Congratulations to both of you. Thanks for tuning in on today of all days. That is super pleasant. AC, Sakrados, Sheepsterina, and Eldritch Queen Despina, welcome. Uh, so, actually, Eldritch Queen Despina is going to get us started by just, what's Hokkaido like? Just being in some of those sites. We can pull up a map if we need to talk about that,
Yeah, if
but
you want to. But yeah, it's the northernmost island of what is now the Japanese archipelago. Uh, we will probably get into some of the history of Hokkaido as a particular place, especially in Japanese history. But I am obviously biased. I love Hokkaido in particular, but Japan more broadly. It's become my second place to be in life. And part of that is just the food, the people. Yeah, I found that places, a lot of my work has brought me to Sapporo in particular. So the prefectural capital of Hokkaido, the biggest city in the north, the birthplace of Sapporo beer.
I mean, a global classic right there.
It's so good. And it is very similar in some ways to where I grew up, which is Southern Ontario, including its Indigenous relations with the Ainu. I grew up near Six Nations reserves, so a lot of intersection of Indigenous life and dominant society. So Hokkaido really just felt very familiar to me. And growing up Japanese Canadian meant that there was, of course, some, I would say, more social shock than culture shock, because it was just the way society functioned more so than the basics of like cultural logic and cultural detail. But yeah, highly recommend going north. If you ever get to Japan, Hokkaido is a very different place from, say, Tokyo or Kyoto. And I think it's part of the experience and part of understanding Japan as a larger place.
Yeah. Um, Okay, first, an anonymous gifter, thanks for the gift sub, and Terralingua, thanks for the full year
Full
of Tier
year.
1 subscriptions. So, welcome. I'm glad you're still excited to be here. I just continue to get more excited to have everyone around. But actually, it's best mentioning, right, Hokkaido obviously culturally is really different, but environmentally is also super duper different. This was something we talked about offline earlier this week, but I think that may be a good place to start. So, for anyone who hasn't been to Japan, Japan is, to use the technical term, really goddamn big. And
Very long.
it's very long. And that makes talking about like prehistoric Japan just environmentally fascinating.
Yeah. I was going to say it makes it a bit of a nightmare, but yes, fascinating.
We'll be polite to it and call it fascinating. Well, chat spams their emotes to celebrate this marginalia moment.
Hype train.
So much
Yeah.
hype. Uh,
But yeah, we talked about how, well, I know you've already kind of gone through a chunk of the Jomon period by looking at Okami, but it's good to know that the Jomon period and Jomon culture is the only cultural period to occupy the entirety of what is now the Japanese archipelago. And then everything after that becomes chunks of Japan have things going on. Wow, there's so much happening
there's so many emotes. So I didn't actually warn you about this, but all of our emotes are modifications of historical artwork,
Of course, as it should
ranging
be.
from our lovely Edo period depressed frogs
I love them so
to
much.
Khmer cats to ancient Greek octopus panics.
Love it.
Yeah,
But yeah, Japan, long. I
it's
think it's 6 different ecological zones from subtropical in the south all the way up to subarctic in the north. So we have a lot going on, and archaeologists are really trying to figure out how to make sense of it all without getting so regionally specific that we never talk to each other about broader interactions in Japan, but also across East Asia and what's now Russia. Like, so much cultural interaction.
yeah. So Wolfie just gave out 10 tier 1 gift subs.
I see that. If
That's
anyone
a
wonders
lot of
why I'm
gift subs.
looking at this way, it's because I have a little monitor.
That's a whole lot of gift subs, so thank you as always. But yeah, I suppose why don't we start just from the beginning? We talked a little bit about the Jomon period. It as far as my research could take me. A couple of weeks ago,
Yeah.
but at the same time, right? This is something that spans a fully 10 to 15,000 years of human habitation. So,
Yeah.
uh, w-
日本のは長いです. Yeah. Yeah. No, Japan is long.
long.
Yeah.
Oh
And
gosh.
yeah, the Jomon period is long, well over 10,000 years. Um,
So,
it's a
so I
lot.
guess how do we identify that all from the very first principles? How do we identify that all as one period?
Yeah, so obviously that is a great question and a bit of an ongoing topic. Not so much. I think for the most part, people accept that the Jomon period is a combination of approaches to technology, approaches to economy, and certain settlement patterns, even though there's variation across time and space. It's mostly set in contrast to the Yayoi period that comes next. So, in some ways, the Jomon is everything that just happens to not be the Paleolithic or the Yayoi, when agricultural society is thought to become dominant in the islands, or at least Honshu. So, yeah, super long. But there are some similarities in, say, how they go about making pottery, even if the exact materials and design choices are different. Stone tools, Also,
Okay,
major components, some things are shared, some things are regional, but general idea is the same.
sure.
And then they would be considered what's known as a broad spectrum economy. So, hunting, gathering, fishing, plants and animal management, early forms of husbandry, and what we would call essentially horticulture. So we know that they were gardening and really domesticating and manipulating some of the plants and animals, including pigs, which they carried around between islands.
Wait,
It's delightful.
I love. Wait, sorry, you can't just drop that on me.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, but they've just. That's amazing.
There was a long debate about whether or not the Jomon did forms of early agriculture or domestication. So this is one of those big debates. And some of the evidence we have is that certain species were not on particular islands in Japan until the Jomon brought them there. So we know that wild pigs were probably put on boats, maybe as little babies, and brought to certain islands within what is now Japan. And now there's pigs there.
Fair enough. And being pigs, I'm sure they cause massive environmental effects because
Oh,
they
yeah.
eat
And
everything.
they eat everything. And the Jomon caused massive environmental effects as well. Like, they moved species around. And we see Hokkaido in particular has its own set of species that don't appear anywhere else in Japan. And during the Jomon period, we start seeing southern species being brought across the water channel into Hokkaido that just weren't there before. It's it's a lot of fun.
Amazing. So, in archaeology methods question, how actually do you detect when, like, even roughly, when species are arriving and what direction that movement is coming from?
Well, in the case of Hokkaido, it's easy because, like I said, Hokkaido is a separate geological as well as environmental little zone. And southern and northern Hokkaido, it's a big enough land body that it even has separate things going on, sets of species, plants and animals. And then we just know that through paleontological record, environmental reconstruction, archaeological excavations, that certain species are either there or not. And
Fair enough.
then suddenly some appear or disappear, depending on what people were doing or major climatic events, but mostly what people are doing.
So basically, if I'm understanding you right, just as you're going through a site, there's no bones. There's no bones of this species. There's no bones of this species. There's no bones of this species. There's bones of this species.
Yep, suddenly pigs.
Suddenly, pigs.
Or suddenly sweet chestnuts is another one that was brought from Honshu into Hokkaido. That happened during the Jomon, and just that tree species was not in Hokkaido naturally, and then it starts being planted around Jomon settlements. So
Okay.
now there's chestnuts.
Yeah. That
Yeah,
makes that
suddenly
super easy.
pigs.
Suddenly pigs is a great takeaway from.
That's
If
actually
we take away
yeah.
nothing, we have suddenly pigs.
And that's like almost like a phase within human prehistory is suddenly pigs.
Yep. Amazing. So I suppose you just mentioned sweet chestnuts, and you had some fascinating hot takes about this while we were
Yeah.
talking. So why don't we go into a little more detail of like what specifically does your research focus on, and
Sure.
what is the thing to correct from what I was talking about the importance of chestnuts 3 weeks ago when I was giving my own talk?
Oh,
Because
did you?
I just stuck with what were all the basic history saying of that chestnuts are the staple crop across the entirety of the Jomon period, crossed all of
Yeah.
Japan, and I was sure wrong about that.
Well, you and many, many other people, including professional archaeologists in Japan and outside of it, this is partly because some of the work that I'm doing and people who do my same technique are just starting to reveal that the nuts thing is a little more complicated than we might think. And before I start, because this was my PhD, I'll try not to go on for too long. But meanwhile, in the chat, if people have questions about the Jomon period, maybe we can start racking those up so that I can try and address them. But for what I do, so my specialty within archaeology is I started out in stone tools and quickly decided that some of the technology stuff wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but it was a great way to look at things that I'm really interested in, which is food. I want to know what people were eating, how they were preparing meals, if we have evidence of them sharing, or some of the significance, because food isn't just a biological fact, it's also a social reality. And that's what I want to see in the past. I don't want to see how people were surviving or get rid of that idea that people just survived in the past and look at how people enjoyed life or made meaning within it. That is a long way to say I scrape microscopic crud off of artifacts, look at it under a microscope, and look for microscopic remains of different plant species that, because they're so small, can survive tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And in some cases, we've even seen some of these microscopic remains survive 1,000,000 or more years because of how preservation works. So, someone knows phytoliths. I obviously see phytoliths, but my main focus is on starch because, one, some of the most delicious things are starchy. And two, it's very easy to see starch granules if they survive on an artifact. And this is where the whole question about nuts comes in. So since well before I was born, the idea for the Jomon in terms of what they would call subsistence, so gathering resources, not necessarily how they use them, but what they were picking up out of the environment. For a long time, it was thought that in the north in particular, the Jomon thrived because they had tree nuts and salmon. This became known as the salmon hypothesis. So, seasonal mass collection of these really nutrient rich resources that were then preserved and lived off of. And in some ways, this means people would have organized their life around a very small amount of species. And this idea was proposed as a way to get started in understanding Jomon food, not as the way to ultimately understand how they lived their lives. At the time in the 1950s, when it was proposed, it was that the Jomon were too complicated to understand. So someone proposed Yamanouchi to make it easier and start with trying to identify staples, which is a very sort of Eurocentric approach to food, thinking that there has to be one or two resources that everyone bases their lives off of, like wheat and the idea of daily bread, or in Japan, rice and gohan and rice as meals. But yeah, as time has gone by, that narrative of nuts and fish and deer and boar have really kind of taken over. And no one really went back to heavily test it until more in the 1980s when my supervisor came along to look at things like seeds and chunks of plant remains at sites. And he found in Hokkaido that there's very little evidence of nuts, so not a lot of nutshell. And sweet chestnuts don't even appear in the area until later in the middle Jomon period. So partway through this whole 10,000 year process. So what does that mean? And the North like Tohoku and Hokkaido are kind of seen as strongholds of Jomon culture where it thrived the best and for the longest. And we're seeing a mismatch then in terms of why they did so well. So if we don't have the evidence for nuts, that kind of breaks down that whole idea that they did so well because they had nuts and salmon.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't want to do what my supervisor did. I made it hard on myself by choosing a type of stone tool that was very understudied, which are grinding stones or kerns. So big old slabs of rock that you crack things on or grind them up. And then I wanted to do residue analysis as an alternate way to look at plants.
Mm-hmm.
And my supervisor was really excited to see if my work would reinforce what he was saying about nuts not being as important based on evidence, and maybe grasses and grains being part of what the Jomon were eating, because he saw a lot of wild version of what is now foxtail millet in his research.
Yeah.
So the only plant consistently found at Hokkaido sites that appears to be going through a domestication process is a form of millet, which, if anyone knows the Ainu, will know that Ainu actually used a lot of millet and grew millet well before Japanese colonialism. So yeah, where I come in though is starch grain analysis is not great for grasses because most grasses look the same under a microscope. I find them very boring. Instead, what I was seeing was a lot of evidence of things like yams.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone knows nagaimo, long yams or Chinese yam, seeing a lot of evidence of those, which grow in the wild around all across Japan. I was seeing things possibly like wild beans, legumes, but mostly things like yams and lily bulbs, which are great sources of easy starch, reliable, easy to see. What I didn't see anything of that I could definitively say was present were nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Nuts are very starchy. If people were grinding up massive quantities of nuts on these tools, then it should have been there. And the idea has become that the stone tools that I look at are somehow indicators of nuts being used. And now, again, we're seeing that. I don't see that if we look closer at the tools. And also, we have evidence that a lot of things could have been ground up on those, or that there's uses other than cracking and grinding for these tools.
Yeah.
So my whole career battle is going to be that the idea of grinding stones as specialized tools for some sort of nut complex is just nonsense.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing specialized about a big slab of rock that you hit with another heavy chunk of rock.
Exactly. And I mean, just fully spitballing here, right? That would suggest to me, right, like bean pastes, and stuff like that we see all across Asia as far back as we have records, right? I mostly am more familiar with Chinese cuisines, but
Yeah.
like red bean paste as just such an important cultural food staple.
Yep.
I would assume something in that same ballpark is what they're trying to produce if they're hitting beans with rocks very hard.
Yeah, and there's lots of stuff and lots of reasons to be, using these tools, even if it's just as a table or flat, hard surface.
Fair, yeah.
So it's not even necessarily that things are being smashed and ground up, but yeah, we have a lot of modern day and historical cuisines that we know do things like azuki. Yeah. Also, if anyone's familiar with Japanese food, the nagaimo, those yams, get ground up into like a sloppy little mess that is actually quite tasty. If anyone has a problem with what I would call mucilaginous foods, though, it might not be for you, but it tastes great.
Fair enough.
Yeah. grinding stones can be used to scrub the skins off of different things. And we also know, based on Ainu cuisine, that lily bulbs can be smashed up and turned into flour because
Okay.
they're so starchy that there's a really easy process to make it into essentially just a regular flour that you can make cakes and cookies and things out of. And we have carbonized cakes that have preserved in whole from the Jomon that they've done chemical analysis on. They're called Jomon cookies. They're quite cute. They're like little cookies, sometimes with little swirl patterns into them or little press marks. So they are made with little patterns on them. What's funny is the ones that we have were definitely someone did an oops in the kitchen. Like there'll be a slab of rock with burned cookies welded to them. So in the baking process, they totally burn their cookies beyond recognition. But that's great for us because then we can see, based on chemical analysis, that they were a combination of things like yam and lily, but also green herbs. Some of them are a blend of plants and animals, so things like venison. There are also cookies that seem to have traces of deer blood in them, so thickening and protein agents. You can even find online some people have created what they call blood brownies based on Jomon analysis, where you're allowed to use chocolate instead of blood, but there is a recreation of what some of these things might have tasted like.
Amazing. I'm just
And
pulling
yeah,
up an image of. Looks like Wikimedia Commons has some from Okinohara. So give me just a second. I can show
yeah.
everyone what these happen to look like.
But yeah,
Ta-da!
burning your food, tale as old as time, and
Ta-da!
great evidence for
They look like
archaeologists.
d- just in digitization. They look like rocks.
Yeah, they thoroughly carbonized. We also have carbonized what we call hamburger, so ground venison that we have found packed into the backs of scallop shells. So they would grind up meat and then pack it with herbs and things into a shell and put it on the fire to make into a little meat patty. And we have some examples of those too. So we know that they were grinding roots and lily bulbs. We know that they were grinding meat. And there's no talk about that in the academic literature. That's mostly showing up in the heritage industry. So
Huh.
local archaeologists and museums are talking about this or showing it because people love it.
Mm-hmm.
But especially in English language publications, we still mostly see this idea that the Jomon lived off of nuts.
Yep.
And I'm
Nuts
here to
and
tell
fish.
you, I'm not a nutritionist, but a person cannot survive on nuts alone,
Hmm.
or nuts is the foundation of your diet. So that's a thing.
Yeah. Um. I love it. So we have 5,000-year-old hamburger from Japan. Fantastic.
Yeah,
This is great news.
Jomon burgers. And so, yeah, one of the things that when those northeastern Jomon sites became part of the World Heritage cluster,
Yeah.
there's a local hamburger joint across southern Hokkaido, at least. It seems to be a local franchise, mostly in Hakodate, called Lucky Piero. It's kind of modeled after a 1950s diner,
Okay.
American 1950s
Yeah.
diner from Japanese perspective. Fantastic hamburgers. Horrifying logo of this clown
Oh.
who's trying
Oh.
to like
Oh
give you a
no.
hamburger. But what this chain did during the campaign for the Jomon to be recognized is they made a Jomon burger that
Oh
was,
God.
yeah. You just saw the logo, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Chat. Clown phobia warning.
Yes. Yeah. Look out for
Uh-huh.
that. And also, if you go to Hakodate, prepare to see that looming over you on the streets because the burger chains are found around. But yeah, great burgers. Don't let the clown scare you away. My favorite is they make a little hamburger that's dipped in like teriyaki sauce. the whole thing and then put on a bun with like mayo and shredded lettuce, and it's fantastic. Yeah, there he
Okay.
is.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, they
I
made a Jomon burger. They just went nuts with. Literally, it was like a venison-based burger with sweet chestnuts on it, as well as an egg and some
that
bacon.
that
It
sounds.
was a little outrageous.
I mean, that sounds like a lot, but I would eat that every single day.
Yeah.
Well, at least
Well, it
try
was.
it.
Yeah, I
Maybe I
would
shouldn't
try it.
promise things. Maybe I shouldn't promise things until I've actually know what the eating experience is like. But I would definitely try it.
Definitely try. And there's, if you're interested in this intersection of like popular perceptions of Jomon food, if you go to Japan, you are going to find like tourist destinations and restaurants in a lot of more rural towns in particular, especially in the north, that have specials based on Jomon food. So you can get like Jomon curry, where it's what they think would have been a sort of surf and turf approach to something like modern curry. You can get cookies that are
Yeah,
reconstructions. Trail mix is really popular as like a Jomon food because it's like nuts and seeds.
sure. That's
Yeah.
that's amazing. I wouldn't have even thought of like food culture as one of the more intense spots of Jomon reception. So that is fantastic.
It's a major intersection, which is partly why the I'm interested in this obsession with Jomon relying on nuts, both academic but also in the popular mind, and how these things all kind of work together to affect the kind of work that I do, which is about food and food making practices. So yeah,
Uh,
lots going on.
that's amazing. Okay, I need to close this window because this clown is haunting me.
Yet don't keep looking at that.
Yeah, no. I worried he will appear outside my house if I look at him for too long.
Luckily, they don't do things like we do in, or not for Lucky Pierrot. There isn't a Ronald McDonald where no one I have ever seen dresses up in a costume and walks around as the mascot. Thank God.
Yep.
So,
We count our blessings on that one, I guess.
yeah.
Oh boy.
Yep. One of my favorite ad campaigns, though, from Lucky Pierrot, which I still don't understand, is they took a bunch of like I'm not an art historian, but it looked like sort of European Renaissance religious paintings of Christian scenes. And they made different people in the scenes hold hamburgers, like giant hamburgers.
I'm so confused.
And I thought it was the most fascinating intersection of like Western Christian art, American hamburgers, and Japanese advertising.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
I loved it.
there's just a lot to unpack there.
I know. We see all of the Japanese stuff being taken by Western society and used however they like. But seeing it happen in reverse in Japan is always really fun.
Yeah. Uh, AC Square has given us a beautiful segue. Now you wonder if there's a Japanese mascot based on a Jomon figure.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
whole bunch.
There are several. The main one that I know of is for a soccer team. Do I remember which soccer team? No. But they have a Dogu and a Haniwa based figurine mascot. There's
The
there are a bunch.
UNESCO site has a Dogo as their mascot.
I can see
If
that, yeah.
if I
There
remember
is,
correctly.
yeah, there is a website that lists every single mascot there is in Japan. There's also an annual mascot competition where mascots from across the country can be nominated, and then it becomes a giant social media based competition about which is most popular.
That's wild. I don't understand Japanese mascot culture, but I do love it.
I also love it. It's fascinating. A lot of them have Twitter accounts too, so you can actually follow them and they have personalities and post things. There's one for the Kofun period, who I used to follow. I forget his name now. Sorry, my brain is not recalling a lot right now, but you can kind of look him up. He's Emperor something. And yeah, he
Amazing.
runs around yelling about the Kofun period.
I love it. That also brings us, since we've now mentioned a couple of Kofun things with the Haniwa and now the mascot, I suppose we should transition vaguely into talking about, what causes the Jomon period to end, and what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
Which is
And
a small and easy question, I'm sure.
yeah, no big deal. Demarcating the beginning and end of culture periods. Never a problem,
No.
she says sarcastically. Yeah, and from what you told me with the end of, well, Okami is a tricky one because it's a kind of a temporal mash of ancient Japan. So there's that. But what
I-
we.
AC, hang on. AC, you can't. Thank you. They turned the jump switch from on to off.
Haha.
I just that I had to acknowledge
I-
the pain.
All right. Thank you for that. Solved. No more archaeology needed.
Exactly.
But yeah, super hard to tell, but what is known as the Jomon Yayoi transition is a very long, not even discussion, but debate. Partly because of how the Jomon and the Yayoi were seen as, like, I want to say binary oppositions. They were seen as like opposites of each other, and this was important to how, at least on a nationalist, in a nationalist sense, Japan and Japanese people were defined. So there's a whole lot of history outside of the actual archaeological information that is related to the Jomon Yayoi transition. And for a long time within archaeological practice, the Jomon was primarily understood through how it wasn't the Yayoi. This was something that I found frustrating about reading even things as late as the late 1980s, but it's like, in order to understand the Jomon, we're going to talk about how they're not the Yayoi. I was like, that's not how to do things.
Yeah, that's real helpful, I'm sure.
Yep. And so what we have at this point is that the Jomon didn't just kind of disappear. There was no invasion. There's a lot of evidence of cultural contact zones between South Central Yayoi as the influence, if not the people, start moving northward and southward into some parts of what is now Japan. I keep saying what is now Japan because there's like 5,000 different islands that are contained within the national territory of Japan. But there's a difference between what is now Japan in our minds and what are territories occupied by different culture periods.
Mm-hmm.
So the core of the Yayoi themselves never really go into Tohoku. They don't get into northern Honshu. But there's still a lot of interaction and cultural exchange and even movement of goods. So we know they were all in contact, but the Yayoi doesn't technically spread across Japan. That's a misconception. And so in some places, the Jomon continues and follows a separate trajectory. So in Hokkaido, the Yayoi never really becomes a present culture period. Instead, we get what's known as the Epijomon or Zoku Jomon, which is nothing like the Jomon, but also nothing like the Yayoi, but also in contact with the South and influenced by both the South and the North. So like Kamchatka, Kurils, Far East Russia, all of this is creating a separate zone in the North. And we have similar things happening in the South, or Nansei, the Southern Islands. So the question of
Yeah.
transition then is an absolute mess because it depends on where you're looking and what you consider to be no longer Jomon,
Yeah.
even if it's not actually Yayoi. And then Kofun doesn't get any better. So what happens after the Yayoi is early state with the Kofun period, which is in some ways even more isolated in the south and south central. But what some might consider a stronger political body. But yeah, after the Jomon, all of these periods start to become segmented into specific parts of Japan and not applicable to the entirety. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was sort of a non-answer to the question.
We love non-answers. I mean,
What do we know? Well,
we know what it isn't.
we know, yeah, that people from continental Asia, largely through the Korean Peninsula, first touched down in southwestern Japan. And this brings new technologies and new approaches to creating food and likely different languages and religions that then interacted in this big contact space that then started to slowly spread northward, bringing some of the technologies and cultural elements with it.
Yeah.
And that there are some major zones where that results in localized culture traditions that then go on to do their own thing.
Amazing. You mentioned this like Epijamon culture in Tohoku. I have never heard of this.
A
Anything I
lot of
was
people
reading about.
haven't. No,
So
it's
you
poorly
say it's
understood.
completely unlike anything. Do you happen to have any examples on hand of like some of the things that make it so notably different
Oh yeah.
from both the Jomon and the Yayoi?
So yeah, we have evidence that things like cultivated rice were being brought into Hokkaido. So Epijomon is almost primarily in Hokkaido, northernmost tip of Tohoku. Sure, there are different thoughts on what these regions should be called and if they are all Epijomon, but the big difference is we see the standard approach to Jomon settlements and lifeways in Hokkaido. So Jomon hallmarks are relatively large, likely sedentary or almost year-round settlements within these areas where they can access multiple resource zones. So the coast, freshwater rivers, forests, they didn't really have to move around if they could, within a village, go and find what they needed or manipulate the plants and animals around to kind of keep what they wanted most nearby.
Yeah.
We have a lot of grinding stone technology to go with that. And we have a lot of really specialized looking, but, just a lot of material culture with a lot of variety. What happens as the Yayoi starts to spread, or the culture and technologies, we see in Hokkaido that people start to not be settled down anymore. They become highly mobile again.
Huh.
We don't really see really clear sites in the same way, especially not year-round or multi-season settlements. The houses completely change shape. They may be still coming back to some of these places, but there's fewer dwellings. They're a different shape and structure. Groundstone almost entirely disappears. So what I work on becomes really hard to see. They still have what might be slabs of stone that were used for similar things, but all of the tool types essentially that define the Jomon just kind of disappear.
What?
Pottery designs change. Pottery production methods stay the same, but new design and aesthetics appear. And it's this wild shift. And also, this is when nuts actually become really important. to diet. So this idea of nuts and salmon being central is something that we see after the Jomon ends in the north. So during the Epijomon, because then we start to see these production sites where they were mass processing chestnuts. So it's just mounds of burnt shell and no good evidence of long-term occupation. So we have activity sites instead of settlements. It's, yeah,
Wild.
massive changes. Yeah.
I mean, is there like paleoclimatic shifts? Is there something else, or is it just really murky as to what happens?
I think a combination of like social and cultural pressures and interactions, perhaps some environmental stuff. I don't like to put a lot of weight into environment, considering the Jomon managed to last 10,000 years.
10,000 years across 6 environmental zones? Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can't tell me that people can't, adjust. But you can also say that maybe this is an adjustment to something massive happening. But we have so much happening across the Honshu and southern part of Japan that I suspect there's a bunch of stuff going on.
That's fair. Wow.
Yeah.
That
Question
is
about when horses show up. That is in the Kofun period, quite a bit later.
horses show up and we immediately get good friend-shaped statuettes of horses.
Yep. Yeah. Kofun
Yeah.
period. Lots happens. But yeah, that's when horses show up.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, that's
You're learning stuff.
my brain has exploded.
And I haven't even really talked about a lot of the stuff for the Jomon that we know. There's just too much.
Well, okay. What is your a favorite fun fact that you feel like everyone should know about that no one knows about?
Oh, when it comes to the Jomon.
Yes.
Let's just go. I don't know if it's my favorite, but let's just go with the thing that first came to mind, because especially in the West, a lot of people are familiar with fugu, pufferfish. And that whole idea of it being super toxic and
Yep.
a specialty. And in the 80s and 90s in particular, it was we're going to go eat a weird thing. We actually have evidence that the Jomon in parts of Japan knew how to properly prepare fugu. And there are some sites along the coast where they were eating it in large quantities. So that's
wow.
maybe 5,000 to 8,000 years ago, they had it figured out.
That's awesome. That is a fabulous fun fact.
Yeah. Also, some of the earliest elderberry wine coming out of the Jomon. So around 12,000 years ago, they were fermenting elderberries.
All right. So, turns out they have the best food. They've got hamburgers. They've got elderberry wine.
Yeah.
They've got salmon and pufferfish. What's not to love?
Any kind of food you could want.
Exactly. As long as
They
it's
pretty much had it.
not sweet chestnuts in Hokkaido.
Yeah. Yeah, not so much. You're not going to find a restaurant that's just called Chestnuts. That's all you're going to get. What's on the menu? Chestnuts.
Dang.
Not,
I should have seen that
not in
coming.
the north.
Oh, My Name Is You has a fascinating question. Any interesting Jomon food and ritual overlap?
Almost certainly, but long history of calling anything that looked unusual in archaeology ritual.
Yep.
And so a lot of reluctance at this point to go too far with that kind of interpretation. Although there is a real argument to say that any kind of daily task, especially socially or culturally informed, is a form of ritual. We say daily ritual. I made a cup of coffee, like the whole process of doing that and my thoughts and feelings around it are a form of ritual. So That's my academic way of skirting that
That's fair. We just
answer.
redefine ritual to mean
Yeah,
almost anything, and then
almost
everything's ritual, and
anything.
we were correct all along.
But we certainly see like what looks like ritualized disposal of what we now consider important species because of how they're treated. So we have a lot of animal skulls buried in arrangements. So semicircles of boar skulls with their noses pointing out. We have arrangements of dolphin skulls pointing back toward the ocean that have been buried in lines and arrangements. And we know that they were eating these things. So, likely, almost perhaps like a sending back ceremony in some cases, where it's like the, you know, renewal and all of that. We see little clay versions of things like mushrooms and pigs, squid caps, the top part of a squid,
Uh-huh.
and also clay walnuts and birds that are found in a variety of contexts. And these are all things that we see are being eaten as well. So maybe linked to some forms of ritual. For me, grinding stones end up in burials sometimes. There's also cases of miniature pots and grinding stones made out of clay that get buried with people. So some of
That's
the tools
wild. Yeah.
the tools of food and such are incorporated into mortuary practices. So there's overlap. There's some discussion about how a lot of daily tools like grinding stones are sometimes intentionally broken and maybe a form of killing an object. And in Japan, there is the idea of objects having spirits and life in their own way. So, the tools and the ingredients get treated with these special practices. So, yeah, lots of potential overlap with food and ritual in that broader sense and not just the daily practice sense.
Yeah. That's fascinating, and that did sort of address one question I had lurking. Obviously there's a lot of unknowable things about Jomon period, quote unquote religious practice. We'll put quotes around that because religion's almost as poorly defined as ritual.
Yeah,
But
they kind of go together.
yeah, I do love that there's at least things we can plausibly interpret as continuity with later Shinto beliefs as that starts to become more defined in the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries.
Yeah, well,
Asterisk,
kind of like
asterisk, asterisk.
Shinto is kind of the Jomon of Japan, in that
Exactly.
it is Shinto is defined as just everything that's not Buddhist
Exactly. Asterisk.
or Confucian, so
Yep.
not imported from China. That's a category that didn't exist.
Fair enough.
It was all just local cosmology and myth,
Yeah,
and
that's
practice.
that's fair.
But yeah,
But yeah, insofar as there is this various stages of attempts at codification in the 8th, 12th, 19th centuries,
yeah.
it is interesting that some of those elements are potentially recognizable going back 5 to 8,000 years.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a lot of attempts to place things like Shinto, as understood through the Nihon Shoki and Kojiki, back into things like the Jomon period, and it
Yeah.
becomes a bit of a mytho-historical train wreck. Really.
That's a
And
great
then
way.
of course, you blend that with different iterations of nationalism through time, starting in the Heian period,
Yep.
and you merge that all together,
Yep.
and you get nightmare soup.
Nightmare soup. Speaking of nightmare soup, I think we have that distilled into Okami.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked about the generic mashing of the past to just represent ancient times.
Exactly. But I think this is going to be a great place to kind of transition into actually having the game running so we can talk about that more generally and also more particularly. But first, why don't we get a chance to everyone stand up and stretch? Because, sitting down for many hours in a row is not good for your backs. It's not good for my back, at least, and that's the only one who matters. Uh,
I'm talking about you guys, but mostly about.
Mostly about me. Every accusation is a confession. And so, yeah, we're going to take just a couple of minutes here to stand up and stretch. We'll run an ad break while that happens, and then when we come back, we'll actually load into the game proper and get to talk more about nonsense mytho history. Because now that we have killed Yamato no Orochi again, we get to meet the all the mytho-historical figures that are really important to Heian mythologies about the Yayoi and have no
Woo!
basis in archaeological evidence.
Love it.
Yay! So, we'll leave you with the questing snails, and I'll just mute us, but we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere. Alright, welcome back, everyone. We will hop into the game as soon as Emma gets back online, but firstly, let's get caught up on stuff. So, Emilius Lives, thank you for the follow. I super appreciate it. And there's some folks who I haven't seen in quite a while hanging out. So, Thistle Vixen, Master Wabbit, it's good to see. Uh, good to see you all around. And yeah. All right, welcome back.
My mic is unmuted? Yes. Perfect.
Hooray. Awesome. So if folks are just tuning in, welcome. Uh, as always, I am Adam. And today I am joined by Emma Yasui, a Jomon period archaeologist and a frequent consultant on Japanese-inspired media, which is
Oh,
a
I
whole
guess.
sentence.
Yeah, I should have done that in my intro. So, yes, I'm an archaeologist, but also very wrapped up in the world of pop culture and game. Partly because it gets incorporated so much into Japanese media that I side in media studies and representations of archaeology and archaeological things in pop culture. And then I also am in the tabletop RPG and board game scene as a cultural consultant and archaeological specialist, trying to remove the stereotypes and racism within so many Western made products that are using Japan as inspiration.
Yup.
Oftentimes, things like Sengoku.
Yup.
So I
Yeah.
do a bunch of stuff. And yeah, I was one of the consultants on Legend of the Five Rings. I know who this is. Hi, Daryl.
I love that this is how small this world actually is. That everyone,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, everyone knows everyone and runs into each other all over the place.
But yeah,
Amazing.
worked on a number of things. And one of the things that I incorporated archaeology into is the Tianxia Pathfinder world setting that's being released soonish, where they brought in a bunch of Asian identifying diaspora and local to revamp the in-world Asia of Galarian, if anyone's familiar with Pathfinder.
Oh man.
So,
Thank
yeah.
goodness for that, because it desperately needed it.
So now knowing more about Jomon, you might actually be able to see some of the references that I make
Ooh,
to the Jomon period in my world setting, as well as Meiji restoration and Meiji history.
I'm very excited now that.
Oh, we have someone who watches Asians Rep. That's great. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about the consultation process if anyone's interested. Asians Represents. All over social media, you can find that.
Amazing. All right, let's get into the actual game, huh? Because it will not play itself. There we go. That looks good. That looks good. Oh, chat, please hold. Panic. Doom, gloom, panic. What the heck happened? Everything just broke here. Just a moment.
That was wild. I'm going to scroll back through and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, there were. So
Technical
I think that's
things
a great
happen.
idea while I attempt to figure out what went wrong there.
And apparently I'm the primary view on the stream now, so people can watch me type.
Exactly. My computer just like completely crapped out. So welcome raiders. You can't see me, but my name's Adam. Hey, I'm back. I don't know what happened there. We are about to hop into Okami, and so we are also talking about the history behind the game, for the Jomon, the Yayoi, and the much later things that have slipped their way in, with Emma Yasui. So thank you all so much for the raid. Make yourself all at home. I'm glad you're here. Okay, so at least that half of it is alive again. Let's see if this half of it is alive. Nope. My Switch crashed? I think my Switch crashed is what happened.
Oh no.
So that's an interesting experience.
Should I just, instead of typing, just out loud address some?
Yeah.
chat
Why don't we
while
do
you
that while I
figure out.
attempt to troubleshoot?
Hey. So I scrolled back quite a bit, but not all the way. So if I missed something and you really want to know, just let me know. But I'm gonna start with something that Adam and I talked about in the non-recorded chat we had from Eldritch Queen Despoina about Dogu figurines, because I know they appear in Okami, and a lot of you probably know that they appear. I'm currently wearing one on a necklace, and I have a little figurine of one on my desk. So super popular in Japanese pop culture and appearing in Western stuff more often. But the question specifically is about meaning. What meaning did these dogu, shakoki dogu, have? And the interpretation as possibly linked to fertility is very common, partly from the history of archaeology and things like Upper Paleolithic studies of like Venus figurines. Uh, Not a lot of consensus and a lot of critique of the idea of them being considered female or fertility based, and that somehow female and fertility go hand in hand. And for a lot of the figurines we have, including the Shikoki, there's no clear gendering in terms of the aesthetics and specific features that we can consistently identify. So there's a big push from some factions to stop gendering artifacts and things like figurines as a better way to understand from maybe the Jomon perspective what they might have been. But the jury is out on that. But yeah, in popular settings, you're still going to see this idea of also the mother goddess movement, if people are familiar with more neo-spiritualist and international uses of archaeology as
Mm-hmm.
support for current day beliefs and political movement interaction too. There is the idea that the Dogu are an example of some sort of natural, deep mother goddess part of human society, past and present. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, there are some issues with that.
There sure are.
Mostly that you're kind of just taking what you want from other cultures and making it something, and there's no one allowed to speak on behalf of the original creator. So it becomes a thing.
Yes.
But yes,
As
there's
people
not
have
one.
pointed out, Barbara Walker moment, because I think both Dogu and like the Venus of Willendorf appear in
Yep.
her deeply strange but also deeply popular writings on that
Yes.
exact subject.
And then Maria Gambudis also wrote about like European, Eastern European in particular, history and transitions in a more feminine to more masculine society, which is actually something that then is relevant to understanding Jomon to Yayoi.
Huh.
Because, yeah, Yayoi is when metallurgy shows up.
Oh.
And Gambudis originally associated metallurgy and the appearance of like metal weaponry to a more male dominated society. And that idea transferred into early Japanese archaeology too.
Well, that's a take.
Yeah, someone just yelled, Gambudis!
Yep.
I assume there was some fish shaking there, or maybe this is a rally cry. I don't know.
No,
But
I can assure you it's not. There is some fish shaking involved in that one.
yeah. Some old man yells at cloud energy.
Correct shouting at Khan? Yeah, that's about right. All right. Chat. With a bit of luck, we are alive again. So we'll find out real quick. Yay! It's not dead.
Woo!
What a time. It turns out if you let it just sit on idle for an hour and a half, it tends to be unhappy.
I guess that's fair.
Yeah, I can't really fault it. I did kind of neglect it. But yeah. So, do. There, while we are uh heading around here,
Oh yeah,
Let's see if I can
Yayoi
remember
mirror.
where the heck we are. I think we had just re-entered. Um, yeah, like just re-entered Kamiki after killing Yamato no Orochi, and so now we have a big giant festival and
As one
rabbits to
does.
feed. Exactly.
So everyone knows the disc on the back is a Yayoi artifact.
Oh, is
Correct.
it?
Yeah.
Amazing. I guess
Well,
that makes
into the
sense because it's clearly bronze, but
it's a bronze mirror.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Then,
widely associated with Amaterasu and Kofun period in particular. The earliest ones were brought from China, probably via. And then we see a really funny phase in Japan where metallurgy specialists try to make their own, which is not good.
we love that.
But they get better. They're really cool, though. Something that's used to try and track the relationships between regions, but also people. Because they were cast from molds. And you would get multiple mirrors from each mold, so they become sort of sister objects. And we see them distributed between burials, and it's a way to kind of guess at baby relationships.
Amazing. Yeah, I knew the three artifacts that they're supposed to be going for are supposedly, the Imperial Regalia.
Yeah.
Right, we've got
three
the mirror,
treasures.
the Magatama beads, and the sword.
Yep.
But I guess I did process, obviously saying that they were given by Amaterasu herself to her descendants, the Imperial line. Must be nonsense, but archaeologically I didn't really process
Yeah.
when must they actually be from?
So Magatama, the comma-shaped beads, can be found from the very beginning of the Jomon period, like long-running practice that continues throughout the Yayoi and the Kofun, and people still make them today. Variety of materials. Most often they show them being made out of jade, but not always. And yeah, Jomon origins, very deep. Yeah, that's the jewel within the thing. Then the mirror. Really that earliest ones from the Yayoi, but definitely during the Kofun. Ties to Imperial China, or some of the biggest Chinese kingdoms at the time. And then the sword itself, mythical. It's a Chinese style sword. So some people will represent the kusanagi as like a katana, but it's not. There's a replica that's said to be a replica of the original that is owned by the Imperial House that no one ever gets to see. So we don't even know if it exists because Imperial House has that on lockdown. But it's essentially a form of Chinese straight sword. Not very big, but yeah. That's usually what that is. And so, further contact. So lots of talk about the transfer of authority through Chinese origin objects and object types.
Yeah.
And the foundation of Japanese state. But their association with Amaterasu in particular, I think, may also come from a weird mashing and blending of Himiko. Because the appearance of Himiko and Amaterasu are so similar in a lot of cases that people mix them up.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't.
Yeah, and Himiko being considered one of the first rulers of Japan, blends into that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, we're a little bit away from seeing how this game does it. Obviously, there's no worry about distinction given that Amaterasu is a dog, and Himiko is not
wolf.
that.
Yeah, so Okami is an honorific for wolves.
Okay.
It just essentially means like great god, and it's a really old term for wolves. Unlike Borufu, which is like the loan word.
Yes, quite.
But yeah, so Okami means god, which is also a wolf. And I think that's where this whole thing came about. So Amaterasu, not associated with wolves in wider mythology. She is associated with roosters, and I think it's like a multi-legged rooster, which is also something that occurs in like Chinese culture, is birds with too many legs.
Well, that would be far more body horror of
Yeah.
a take for this game. You know?
Yeah, they're like, maybe we don't have giant rooster running around. Although if
But,
anyone's played Sekiro, there are giant black roosters that
Yeah, there sure are.
giving that vibe.
I'm not sure where we're actually supposed to be going, so I'm just running up here to see if the Nagi Shrine happens to have anything of use. Looks like it
Sure.
does.
Do the thing.
Do the thing. Oh, good. Johnny has found some examples of both some of the mirrors and some potential scholarship that argues the Magatama develops out of less curved things, but also maybe like Paleolithic fang ornaments.
Yep.
Amazing.
Long history.
Yeah, that. Oh, okay. Well,
I think I've.
spear blade, and so many things.
Hearts.
Okay. Wait, Kushi, how are you doing? But yeah, I suppose, in terms of our historical documentation, right, you've mentioned, obviously, Chinese things a whole bunch. As far as I'm aware, isn't our first, like, written source Chinese as well? The Report of the
Yeah.
Kingdoms of Wa?
So Wa or yeah is not at this point an archaeological reality. Rather, it is something that was recorded in Chinese court documents.
Yeah.
I want to say Sanguoji is it's like the story. It's not the Three Kingdoms, but it's the same idea. But it is a court document that talks about how a group of representatives went to Japan, or what we assume is Japan, and traveled through Korea into this little kingdom that is in either Kyushu area or closer to the Kinki prefecture area, like a little more north.
Sure.
But yeah, it talks about there being this queen. This is where we get our record of Himiko, and the description of her power partly being over the ritual world, and she's sometimes translated as being a witch or a priestess. Yeah, depending on which translation you look at.
I hate some of these translation choices.
I know, right? They change, but what was I saying? Oh, the actual historical record versus reality.
Yes.
So some of the interpretation of what's or how far or how powerful Himiko or even what is Yamatai would have been is partly based on interpretation of a few broken records from a completely different region.
Yes.
And we don't really have anything to say that it's just like, oh, this is where Yamatai was, or even if that we know that in some regions there were some settlements that were becoming more centrally important to things like trade and maybe even ritual life. So big ceremonies would be held at particular places. Makimuku is a place if you want to look up, maybe perhaps one of them, definitely important into the Kofun period. But we don't actually have any location or material evidence to be like, okay, here's Yamatai, and we have absolutely nothing to say, here is Himiko. So some people have proposed that I think it's called Hashihaka, one of the early tombs, a big keyhole-shaped tomb, may have been Himiko's. But it's not been excavated. And even if they did, I don't know how they would support that it was somehow Himiko.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of interpretations that various tumuli across South Central Japan are linked to specific mytho-historical and historical figures. But we know through archaeology that some of that is just unsupported.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Some of the ones that have been excavated ended up being empty, so...
Oh, that's an interesting problem to
Love
run
it.
into.
Love to see it. They're like, this is a burial of this ruler. It's like, oh, it's
There's
full of
nobody
nothing.
in here.
Some of them are just platforms.
Amazing. So yeah, there's a question there. Are they empty because there was like a spot where there was supposed to be something and it got stolen, or is it just fully like there was never something there?
Some of them were just, like I said, they appear to have been platforms or structures, but there's no. So Kofun or the ancient tombs and tumuli would have had stone-lined chambers within them. So if there's no chamber, then there's probably no going into this structure. So
Yeah.
highly unlikely to have a burial in the first place. But historical records have them estimated as belonging to so-and-so. Just kind of showing the issues of connecting really old records and records recorded well after the event or time period.
Yeah.
Just not lining up with things, but there's still a lot of control over archaeological work on anything like a tomb or tomb mound because of their potential associations with the imperial house. So they are property of the emperor and the imperial agency, and messing with them is not really allowed.
yeah, that makes it more difficult to challenge the mytho-history, because you're not able to do any. If you're not able to actually do research on it, besides that sure is a mound.
Yep. So if anyone wants to look up the Kofun, Kofun, some of them are actually easily visible on Google Satellite, and they tend to show up in clusters. So if you look for, I believe it's, maybe I'll just find it and post it in chat.
That would be awesome,
while you
because
play.
then I can always switch what windows up top to be able to show any links that get dropped.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay. I think I've talked to everyone in town now. Except for the Buddhist monk who is here for some reason. Okay. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Oh, there is a question brought up. Hearing the soundtrack, you got curious as to what instruments or musical traditions exist in prehistoric Japan, and that is a fascinating question. I like the ones in the soundtrack.
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, it happens. The ones in the soundtrack I know are chord instrument traditions that theoretically stretch back to the Heian, but in actuality, most of the surviving, instrumentation and music is from quite a bit later.
Yeah, and so music isn't something I specialize in partly because I've focused so much on the Jomon. There's some speculation that some of the Jomon pots were actually meant to be used as drums for sound creation rather than as vessels. But in terms, I also can't hear the soundtrack. I guess I could unmute, but I'm not
yeah.
going to do that. But a lot of it is more historical, court instruments, as far as I know. So you see a lot of them being used in Breath of the Wild when you go to the Sheikah villages. That's all the same instruments that are historical
Exactly.
court, music.
Yep, and that's mostly what we hear in the game, is that they've got a Western orchestra, and then they supplement that with a show and a shakuhachi, and those very standard chord instruments.
Yeah. All right, so for those who want to see the Kofun and the tumuli, if you go to Google Maps into satellite mode, if you look up, I'm going to type it right away too. If you look up the Tomb of Emperor Nintoku, it will bring you right to one of the biggest ones we know about. And then if you scroll out, you can see that they actually appear in clusters. And you can see a big smattering of them as they look today, surrounded by buildings.
Where's our satellite mode? We have the power.
We can do it. But yeah, Nintoku is one of the biggest.
That is utterly enormous.
And so it's surrounded by a big moat and some series of forested areas.
And then
I know we're not talking about Kofun period yet. I don't know if you had a game lined up. But you can see all the...
There's a big old gap
okay.
between, apart from maybe vaguely Age of Empires and their Rise of the Yamato campaign.
Yeah.
But that is just replicating some invention and some mytho history, and is not going to have much material culture in it.
Yeah. And so this is probably the best time because of the connection between early states. There's some speculation that Himiko's kingdom Yamatai becomes the foundations of Yamato. Again, not really archaeologically a thing, more in historical documents, but yeah, those tombs are thought to be the core of some of the government or state centralization in southern Japan. And Nintoku is the biggest, but then there's a whole bunch of other ones around it. And they're a lot of fun. A lot of speculation about meaning, why you would make this big tomb and all of that. And there are some interpretations that it was an attempt to recreate a mountain. So man-made mountain. Mountains are highly symbolic, partly as the higher up the ground, the closer to the heavens you could be. So getting closer to the kami, and also mountain these spaces of greater supernatural and magical power. So creating a bit of a portal into the mythical realm. Partly making it a shorter trip for the person who has died to interact with the ancestors in the kami. And also some speculation about mountains and going into the earth as being a form of womb. And so returning people to the womb of the world and all of this. People have gotten really into interpreting the tombs.
That's wild, because that seems like that's pulling in two totally opposite directions, right? One to go up, I want to go more platonic, more down.
Yeah.
And they just can't decide which one it is?
Or just as a connecting place, like part of the fears and concerns about safety in the mountains, and a lot of the idea that forested mountains in particular is where you're going to have the most supernatural activity. Also why you see so many monuments and trees and stones marked in the Japanese mountains as being spiritual or important places.
Sure.
Is because it's just thought the boundaries between this world and the other are very slim to non-existent in the mountains.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Partly because of the height, but just, lots going on.
Yep,
Oh, hey, pups.
they're so cute. These, I
Yes,
love
lots of
the dog
bears and
warrior
ones.
quest was very long, but we saw a lot of very good dogs. So
A lot of good doggos. Cute.
by the way, pulling them up appears to have gone in chat talking about Kingdom Hearts, which I truly loathe. So thank you for that. Thank you, chat. We can't have a single keyhole-shaped thing without Kingdom Hearts.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I get it. I have never actually played a Kingdom Hearts game.
No, I do not recommend
I think it's,
it. I've
I think
played
it's
too
too
many.
late to start now. I'm too old for that.
Okay,
Trying to make a
Cannot-
Shintai for the spirit of the Emperor as big as Mount Fuji. Sure. It's one of those things where anything is kind of possible when it comes to what they were actually trying to achieve, because for the Kofun, it's sometimes labeled, it's a problematic term, proto-historic. It's this period where Japan is recorded in China's history books and records, but doesn't have its own. So we're still relying on archaeology to try and really make sense of Yayoi and Kofun,
yeah.
which is why it also gets lumped together with like just ancientness in general. You will see Jomon, Yayoi, and Kofun stuff get smashed all together in popular settings just because it's all just ancient. It's all prehistory. There's no
Yes.
documents. So yeah, what things actually mean, and Chinese documents don't go into local understanding or meaning. Maybe they'll do very practical, like, we sent an envoy here, we gave them this present, everyone got back safe. Story done.
Exactly. Like they are not interested in, I guess, what I would call the ethnographic impulse.
Yeah.
No.
The emic rather than edict, so understanding from someone else's perspective. No, they did. No.
No. I mean, good lord, finding those for anywhere in the world prior to very recently is rare and special. So, as much as I wish we could say, yes, people were interested in recording other people's beliefs. No, they weren't.
No.
I mean, as it is, right? I mean, the fact that we have, what is it, the Fudoku? Those little records of beliefs around Izumo province from the Nara period is... Fudoki? Oh no, it's like one of the... Fudoki, thank you, Sakurdos. I did find a translation of those, actually. Don't ask me where, but I did find one.
Okay.
And that is... I mean, you can probably guess, because finding a library that has some is difficult.
Yeah.
But I like getting monetized, so we won't go into any more detail than that.
Okay. Fair.
But yeah, so I did actually find a translation, but I mean, having actual beliefs recorded as part of the administrative records is
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Very much. But yeah, a lot of what we're working with for things that are showing up in games like Okami are more popular interpretation of history.
Yeah.
And because there's so little, things get super creative, sometimes really wild. And so they become more of a representation of concerns and ideas, more so than representations of things that we can actually support with archaeology or other historical documents. So, yeah. Lots going on.
Lots going
Himiko
on.
is one of those places.
Yeah, I'm
And
trying to
that confusion
get
between
Isan
Himiko
to
and Amaterasu.
I'm trying to get Isun to let me move on so we can actually, meet her and talk about her in more detail. But Isun's not cooperating because why would he?
Why?
Think I can brute force my way out of the village? Amazing. Anyway, there's another archaeological question on how do you actually determine how old a grindstone is?
Oh, that's fair. There are some style things that we can do, certain types and appearances based on morphology. Certain morphological types show up depending on region, but for the most part, it's through association with other materials like pottery types. There isn't a lot of absolute dating being done, so radiocarbon, AMS dating, things that use molecular level business to figure out dates. It's being done in Japan, but a lot of the dating that's associated with artifacts is based on associated pottery types. There is a highly detailed typology based chronology for the Jomon period. It is this massive chart, and the understanding of what types were popular when has been researched to death. So we have a pretty good understanding. If it's found with one pottery type, it's probably from within this range or sub-period, like the early Jomon. But there's no direct way to really date something like a large chunk of basalt. Like,
Yeah.
some of these stone materials don't really offer a whole lot.
That's fair. It's a rock. What do you want us to do about it?
Yeah. And groundstone is really tricky too because it's a huge chunk of rock. It can have an incredibly long span and be useful for multiple generations of humans. So we also don't know the relationship between where we find a stone tool and things like when it was first used, when it was last used, how often was it used. We can't really tell that from these artifacts themselves, so it becomes a complicated relationship between long-term, or what we would call object life histories, and what we can actually tell. So at most, what I can say is, based on its location, its general estimated age, and then any residues that I get off of it I can only say are evidence of its last potential use, and not something like recurring use, or if there were layers of events. I can only say this one instance was likely the last before it was disposed of and deposited. So we can't get that exact with dates, but we can talk about general chunks of time and if there are similarities or differences between the sub-periods or hundreds to thousands of years time spans. Yeah, it's a mess. Question about the residues. I do primarily work with plant residue, record other things that I might see, such as fibers, so plants, but also animal fiber, hair, things that might look like muscle tissue I'll take note of, but I can't associate with a family of animals or animal types.
Yeah, that's fair.
There's also a lot of work being done on using red blood cells. Blood doesn't always survive as well, but what's interesting is we get sort of ghost outlines of blood cells sometimes preserved in residues if you look at them on the stone and don't take them off like I do. There are some differences between mammal, fish, and reptile blood cell structure that can help identify something, and I think bird too, that can help you distinguish perhaps what type of animal a blood residue came from. But for the most part, the best way to distinguish different animals is through their fur and their hair. If you look at those under a microscope, different species have different scaling patterns on the surface of their hair. And this is used in forensics as well to see if there were different animals present or in contact. So a human hair under a microscope is going to look completely different from a cat or a rabbit. So lots of microscopy, yeah. And that is something, and I can distinguish between different animals and different plants as well if plant fibers are being used to make like rope or weaving fabrics. Fungus is the bane of my existence. Daryl's probably heard all about this, Daryl in chat. Mm-hmm. Part of my PhD research was thoroughly destroyed by fungus.
That's
because they
funny.
like to eat starch.
Yeah.
So I did a whole season of collection in 2014, took a bunch of samples. I had to bring them back to Canada from Japan on an airplane, and then also mount them on slides and go through them. And somewhere in that process, fungus got into my archaeological samples and started to eat any starch that survived. So all I saw was this happy little fungus colony that isn't visible to the naked eye, but when you put it under a microscope, it's like, ah! It's all of these little threads with little balls on them. It's actually quite cute. But all I can say is that there was definitely starch in those samples because the fungus ate something. But I will never know what it was because the fungus ate it.
Yeah, which had actually been, something when we were talking earlier in the week, and you said this is what you do, was like, I was surprised that there weren't microbes, fungal or otherwise, that were sort of demolishing these 100,000 or tens to hundreds of thousands of year old starch material.
Yeah.
Because even at this like molecular level, I was amazed things were surviving that well without microbes just doing their happy little thing and demolishing anything useful for us.
Yeah, and there are a lot of studies as to why these residues survive so well when they are tasty and you would think quite soft. Mm-hmm. On the molecular level, starch is fairly durable. It's a series of soft and hard layers. It forms kind of like, in 2D, it looks like a shell. It has sort of a soft layer and then a hard crystalline outer bit. And then it goes into layers. And that's why we can kind of visually recognize the differences, because different plant families will do that process differently, creating different shapes, a different layer spacing, different light properties. That's how we identify different plant species based on their starch. But yeah, they seem to preserve best in cases where there's either surface carbonization, so a blob of something gets burned on the outside to seal everything inside, but doesn't do enough to burn all the way through, or in cases where things dry really quickly and then get covered pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
It's all about creating sort of a casing around things, and that happens really easily in, say, little pits and cracks in artifacts where it gets packed down in, and then you only need a little part of the surface to dry, crust over, and protect the rest. And then they're good for like 1,000,000 years or more. We have found starch in the dental calculus of Homo erectus samples. So dental calculus is just plaque that's essentially mineralized. So if you don't floss your teeth, you're kind of keeping record of a bunch of things that you've eaten throughout your life, but also going to have a lot of dental health issues.
Yeah.
But for past people, including hominins, we can extract some of that plaque, break it down, and look at the microscopic remains in it, and things like starch, pollen, phytoliths, sometimes blood cells, sometimes tissue, and do chemical analysis and kind of see what some people were, putting in their mouths. Not always eating, because we also know that for a very long time, it looks like both hominins and humans have been using things like sticks and branches to kind of clean their teeth as best as possible.
Yeah.
So some of what we get in there are phytoliths from trees, where we know they weren't eating the trees, so maybe they were using the sticks to try and clean out their mouths. But yeah, lots going on. What was I even talking about? How things survive?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that actually
And-
answered that very nicely.
Okay. And then, yeah, Daryl mentioning, I did talk about contamination issues. So when working with ancient residues, you always have to be worried about, especially microscopic stuff, floating around and getting into everything. So I have to make sure that nobody's eating starchy stuff in or anywhere around me or the materials I'm working on. And yeah, there are a lot of products in this world that are manufactured with starch, like a lot of paper towel. The production method itself has sort of a starchy slurry involved with the production method, so common paper towels are loaded with starch.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And yeah, there's an unfortunate trend for a lot of archaeologists to use things like dried beans and dried rice as supports for pieces of pottery and such. So when they're working on reconstructions, to sort of prop it up and manipulate it and hold it in different places. Instead of things like sand, they'll often use like black beans or rice as a holding medium. And
Yeah.
so when I go into labs, I'm like, I can't do anything here. Just, it's going to be rice starch as far as the eye can see because it's everywhere.
Yep, that checks out to me.
Good times.
Right? Because, I mean, I work in, or have worked in rare books libraries, and those say, quite definitively, right, you use rice paper as your preservation tool. So you end up with rice starch all over those labs
Everything.
as well, because that's
Yep.
your glue, that's your everything.
Yep. Rice, it's everywhere.
It's
What's
rice.
really great for what I do, though, is some of the most common domesticates that are used in these industrial processes or appear in most foods would not have been prevalent in the Jomon period. So
Oh.
as soon as I see them, I can write
Yeah.
them off. One of the biggest ones is cornstarch. Cornstarch gets put into lab gloves. It then ends up on any other product that's made in the same factory.
Sure.
And cornstarch is, yeah, just a basic thickening agent in a lot of things. So also very easy to identify. It's very distinct. So as soon as it shows up, I'm like, well, everything's contaminated. It's time to start over again. And
Yep.
yeah, no corn in the Jomon period. No rice
Who
either.
could have predicted that?
Yeah, wow. Good times.
Ay. Maybe I don't care about this minigame enough to
Yeah,
keep
what is
going.
even happening?
Totally useful minigames.
You just collecting stuff?
Yeah,
It's been
just
so
digging.
long since I played this.
It's just trying to dig down to find a spot, and I got him stuck into a corner where I couldn't
Hey,
do
archaeology.
anything. Yay! Exactly.
Sure.
The archaeology, the Heinrich Schliemann approach to archaeology of just use bombs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Surprising amount of dynamite was involved.
Oh boy. We have strong feelings about that here.
Yeah. As one should.
Exactly. And there's the drawbridge is up for no reason. There's a lot of fire. There's a lot of
Hano
fire.
Moheiji. I love the Hano Moheiji, the little happy face. It's actually what's all over my business card.
That's amazing.
I love them.
And we've got Queen Himiko has issued an order to close off the city for no reason. Let's get a couple of these so I can still fast travel. Don't need any of those. Aw.
I'm not familiar with the Kofun being turned into an underground plane factory, but I totally believe.
That sounds like the sort of thing you would do.
Yeah,
Yeah. Uh,
I also wonder attempted to be made, yeah. There
tell me the
are
rumor.
a few projects, I believe, where archaeologists weren't allowed to dig into a kofun, so to bypass those protocols, they decided to just kind of dig under it to start on the outside and make a little tunnel under it to see if there was anything there.
That's. Have you heard a million times? Amazing. So for reference, what peels were about in the rest of the world during the Jomon period? Many. Very,
It would have been
very
a
many.
lot. So Jomon spans anywhere between 16,500 years ago to as recently as 2,300 years ago, depending on where. So,
Well, you know, that's
in
anywhere from, Sumer to Alexander the Great, basically.
yeah, 12,500 BCE to about 300 BCE. So you can plot down a lot of different peoples and societies in that span of time.
Yeah, you can. So yes, middle to late Jomon is Neolithic into Bronze Age Europe, which is
Yeah. And lots of exhibits comparing different Neolithic figurines from around the world. So Dogu get compared a lot to some of the European material. Although Japanese archaeologists are very reluctant to call the Jomon Neolithic. Partly because of a debate about whether they had agriculture is needed to define the Neolithic. This is going all the way back to Vergord and Child and the Neolithic Revolution, which we now all accept is a fun idea that doesn't hold up in world archaeology.
Yep.
The idea that agriculture appears with this package of traits, and it doesn't even work in Southwest Asia, where it was originally supposed to apply to, so absolute nonsense, but nice try.
It's I say it's the thought that counts, but it really isn't.
I'm just thinking a lot of academic history is just, it was all nonsense, but nice try.
Exactly. Aye.
You got a bead.
I got a bead. There's the thought that does something. Yeah, that sounds about right. Anyway, we've met, as AC Esquire has mentioned, one of the NPCs we just met is based on Asunu Yoichi. So we get the Heikamonogatari referenced for much later literature.
Yeah, you know, just
Yeah.
blend it all together.
Exactly. Hey, if
And
we're
there
allowed
is
to
a-
have Hokusai engravings,
Yeah.
we're allowed to have Edo period literature about the Genpei War.
Anachronism, love it.
Also a canon. Don't worry about the canon.
There is. This isn't going to explain why they did this in this game, but there is a history of more recent historical figures being associated with mytho-historical or deities and them getting blended together, sort of a representation of this. So, what's his name? Hachiman. So the god of war, Hachiman, has been sort of blended and merged with actual historical figures and warlords over time. So his tomb has moved around and his spiritual location has moved around depending on temple or shrine you look at, but also that's related to actual historical figures and where they're buried. It's it's a difficult blend of like syncretic when multiple things get merged and confused.
Yes.
That has happened. So that could explain why some of these characters are showing up here because of their association through time and blending with different periods.
Yeah, that seems very plausible because this seems to. Sorry, I got distracted by the fact that we caused a gargantuan explosion.
Yep.
But right, in many ways, I love starting with this game because it is just fully blending all time periods and creating a really good distillation of pop cultural Japan in a way
Yeah.
that is very good. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's very silly for us trying to do a lot of history right now. But it's very good for anyone trying to do pop culture and just, hey, you need a snapshot of what signs are important? Yes.
Yes. So yeah, Handwave's Ancient is a very good way to summarize how some of the stuff is used. And one of the things I'm interested in is how different audiences recognize and receive these nods to history and archaeology. Because people in Japan are more likely to recognize the references and have some framework for them because they're all forced to learn this in grade school, in history class. Archaeology is incorporated into history class. But what we see in their use is that, all of the references to like Jomon Dogu are just about being ancient, not about being Jomon or anything that we consider Jomon culture, but just like a hand waves ancient. This is an ancient or distant time or people. It's an artifact of this long ago. Where are we? The past. That's about it.
We sure are. And I mean, I recognize a lot of it, right? To throw back to something we touched on very briefly, right? The Jomon are not interested in ecology, right? In the way we would think about it, or environmental preservation. They're interested in doing what makes things more convenient. If that means bringing pigs somewhere where they're going to eat a bunch of the native grasses, that's the native grasses problem.
Yeah. You bring your stuff.
Exactly.
There's a lot to be done to start thinking about something like traditional ecological knowledge for a society and culture that no longer exists and we can't talk to. But yeah, it is something worth thinking about, especially with food, because it has to do with understanding the world. Not just is it biologically edible and nutritious, but is it considered good to eat?
Yes.
And I do think with the nuts, there's a large assumption that nuts now are considered a great thing to eat. They're kind of a treat in a lot of ways. And specialty foods, they're also highly identifiable. Some of them are quite neat looking.
Yeah.
And I think that does have some influence on thinking that the Jomon would have thought too. And hence thought nuts were more important than other things, but
That makes sense.
what do we do about any of this?
Exactly. But right, it's a place where I see, ukiyo-e traditions, and this late 18th century move towards the Tokaido, right? The views of Mount Fuji as something, I don't know, significant and something artistically relevant just has such an enormous impact later on, and that you can't help but adopt it here.
Yeah.
Is sort of my take. And that's not a bad thing. It's just it's a
Oh
case of
no.
very clear artistic and I guess cultural blending going on.
Yeah. And that's a good thing to say outright is a lot of what we see in pop culture that borrows from the past isn't necessarily a bad thing. Although with my work in consultation, it's about giving people a broader context for how it intersects with politics past and present and
Yes,
just things to keep in mind.
exactly.
Like the references here or some of the objects or narratives intersect heavily with the history of Japanese nationalism. This Amaterasu and all of Himiko are seen as the founders of the nation, so it's of course going to get blended with that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, interesting stuff.
It is. I think it's super interesting, right? Like genuinely, that this like long trail of historical meaning, uh, is just so much fun to me. And seeing a lot of the same things that my professional work has focused on showing up in a completely different cultural context is
Oh
just
yeah.
very fun. Go straight up, and that creates
Oops.
a water. Oh, that does not create a water spout. Um, how do I create a water spout? How do I get up onto that? I can just jump, actually. It looks like there's just tracks of needing to train water to water to water here.
Whee!
Yay! Also, apparently we were fighting a Buddha statue there for the
Yeah.
yokai we just ran into. Oh, yep, that sure did it. Oh, camera. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Oh yes. As
Hunter
Chad
has
has
been
noticed,
poking at me.
Chad has noticed that we have a cat. We have a special guest for our special guest,
This is Hunter. He decided he wanted attention.
and we respect that.
He doesn't want to. It doesn't always want to use his own body. Stands and pokes at me and
Aw,
kind of lightly claws at me until I. Here we are.
you know, sometimes he just needs baby time.
Yep.
And as I said, Chad is not at all disappointed. Alright, and now that the city is not cursed, you can actually get on a little bit more.
Wee, not cursed.
Yay for not being cursed. And also a very late city design. Right, the big, tall, like, steepled castle design. As far as I know,
Yeah.
is what, Muramachi period at the earliest?
Some of those castles, yeah, definitely.
But again, right, what does a classical city in Japan look like?
Yeah.
Well, you get, was it Hideki Castle?
And Himeji? There's a bunch of different
Himeji?
ones.
Yeah. I don't...
But yeah,
We are, at that point, we're 1,000 years ahead of where my research is.
very yeah, different stuff. But houses and layout, from what we can tell for like Yayoi and Kofun, didn't first of all look like that. But what's fun is from the Kofun period, you know, the hunt cylinder people and horses and dogs. We also have some haniwa that are buildings
Oh,
and some that are boats. So we kind of have an idea of what houses and structures may have looked like.
amazing.
But yeah. And question about Hunter's brain cells. He's actually quite too
Wow.
clever for his own good sometimes. So yeah, I know Orange Cat's he is goofy, but he's not I don't know, stupid, one would say.
Fair enough. He's hoarding them. That's why all the other orange cats are like that. He's hoarding
Yeah,
them.
he's got the collective brain cells of orange cats.
Well, I'm probably going to... I can draw lily pads in the water. I don't know why I'm not doing that.
Now Hunter's blocking my screen, so
Aw.
he is in the way, aren't ya?
Heck.
There we go.
Oh boy. The game does not appreciate my artistic lack of talent.
It's like,
I can't imagine doing this on the original release with frickin' Wii motion controls.
oh yeah.
That sounds genuinely awful. What?
I played it on the DS.
Oh, that's why. It literally, there's an invisible wall there.
Oh.
I was like, let me draw something. And I was like, this must be because I'm bad. But no, it's because the game says no.
It just says no.
You found it okay on the Wii? Hey, that's something.
It would have been like the motioning stuff.
Yeah.
I guess that would work. Well, obviously it worked. They released it.
It worked well enough. Okay. Let's try that again. Now that we can see the actual rest of the area. We've got more people, we've got more stuff, we've got a weird sunken thing. Uh-huh. Terrifying water dragon.
Love it.
Well, that's fine. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't the god of the... I suppose there's probably multiple gods of the sea, but isn't Susanoo supposed to be, like, one of the big ones?
For stormy seas, yeah.
Fair
So, what is it? Yeah, Watatsumi is the sort of like Amaterasu level, like one of the big older kami that is like the Poseidon of Shinto
Okay.
pantheon. Like the sea is Watatsumi's, and sometimes, yeah, intersects with dragons. Lots of stuff going on. The actually the Kusanagi, the sword that's within the three treasures, they given to Amaterasu by Watatsumi, so some connections there.
Oh. Okay.
My mythology is there, but I can't remember for sure if that's how it goes. And then the Kusanagi ends up getting to Susanoo.
Yeah, in the Tale of Yamato no Orochi, which is,
Yeah.
yeah. I feel almost bad for the snake, except that it's terrible and awful, and so I don't feel bad at all.
Yeah, you're not supposed to feel bad for it. In this game, do you get it drunk in order to kill it?
You do, but in a
Okay.
somewhat weird way, because it's like it just kind of stands there and sprays random nonsense at you until you get it very drunk. And it was actually quite frustrating.
I could see that.
Okay, so that does nothing. There we go. Just had to wait for it to die. And then it's got an umbrella. That's also a sword. Swordbrellas.
Why not?
Why not, apparently. Do I count? Do I have to, like, quick draw it? Well, this'll work. That should get it pretty well done. Nope. Not there yet.
Nope.
And that does nothing, and I don't have a fire source. So, I guess we just be patient.
Whee!
Whee! Ow. Turns out you do have to actually dodge, though. Which I did not do. Okay, if you're cutting, I can cut faster? No? Okay. Ow.
Womp.
Could you do anything, please? Please.
What sort of projects am I working on? Archaeology or games? Or both?
I guess... What are you allowed to talk about?
I can talk about the archaeological stuff. No problem. A lot of the games I'm under NDA, so I can't say anything, so... I do try to announce the things that I've been involved with on Twitter, so
Okay.
there is some record, but yeah. I can say that I have wrapped up some consultation on Legend of the Five Rings and writing for Paizo for Pathfinder Tianxia. I'm currently consulting for Ross Tulsarian Games, but I don't think I can talk about the specifics at this point.
That is totally fair.
Did some work on a board game about sushi,
Oh,
which is fairly cute and ready, I think, almost to be released, so that will come out soon.
amazing.
For archaeology, though, I'm currently writing a grant proposal to go back to Japan and specifically look at how both museums, media, and pop culture portray Jomon food and meals and cuisine,
Heck yeah.
and compare that to how academics have been talking about it, especially in English language. Just to show that, from what I suspect based on my experience, there's a big disparity between English language portrayals and Japanese understanding, both popular and academic. And it's kind of a miscommunication between local archaeologists, heritage, and international academics who want to talk about the Jomon, but don't always have to really get into the weeds about what we know about food and technology and such for the different regions. So that's the project that I kind of want to go with, because I'm really interested in representation and the intersection between popular and academic,
Yeah.
which is one thing that I'm wrapping up is a study of Shikoki Dogu in pop culture. So I told you briefly, I'm submitting it soon, so hopefully it will exist in the world, but I did an analysis of 405 separate cases of Dogu, Shikoki Dogu showing up in manga, anime, video games, card games, tabletop and board games, and live action television and movies. So Okami was definitely on the list.
Yeah. That is so many different places.
Yep. So 405 as of October 2022. I've definitely identified since then because they're constantly being. And just kind of looking at where they appear, how they're represented, what kind of roles they play within these products, and what that could be doing to influence public perception of Jomon or the Dogu in particular.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the difference between Japanese and North American audience reception, but that's like a whole thing. That's like a huge project.
Yeah, that, I mean, I don't know how many people actually like know of them outside of like I don't know this game and Persona. And for
Yeah,
North American audiences,
Arahabaki.
there's a really, really small number of media that are gonna show them at all.
Yeah. So some basic things I found out of the 405 representations that exist within products. About 50% of them have been officially imported into distributed across North America. So you've come across quite a few of them, not just Pokemon. Shin Megami Tensei, which is the broader category for Persona, is most definitely one of the most influential. So Arahabaki, and even in Japan, people refer to Dogu when they see them as Arahabaki and reference Shin Megami Tensei as part of their understanding of the imagery. So I find that fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that that's super fascinating. As we know in the city, though, we just ran into someone just as fascinating. Um, Samurai Dandy with an
Ah,
Elizabethan collar. Look at that! Look at that, Ruff. Calling
love it.
himself a commoner, and I'm deeply confused.
I think I would have to check. One of the things I briefly worked on that doesn't exist in the world, but I can be vague about is creating sort of a database for artists to draw from when designing costuming for characters based on Japanese traditional clothing and variations of it in more recent
Oh
clothing.
man.
And so I did a pretty deep dive into different forms of clothing. It takes forever, and the contract was kind of brief, so I didn't get into it that much. But
Yep.
there are different interesting pieces that we might not recognize. And like, I don't know if that was an Elizabethan ruff or a reference to something else.
That's fair. I would do not know either. But
Fukushoku.
what do we have as a link here? Oh, that's
Ruffuru. It's
fascinating.
just rough.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
nope, that is the wrong window. Uh, I have 3 different Firefox sets open, so you'll forgive me for loading
Yeah.
into the wrong one, and here we go.
And yeah, there are
Ta-da!
multiple dogu across animal. Ah, there we go.
Ta-da! Uh, so
Ruffuru.
there he is. It's a rough. A Christian, the text says Kirishitan.
Kirishidan.
Well, that does make it pretty explicit. Because it turns out if there's anything, at least this community latches onto faster than food history, it's fashion history. So
Fashion is super cool. And so, unfortunately, it's not like a shareable database, but there are many Japanese museums and websites that do things like that site that was just looked at. I really focused on it was more of an instruction manual on the names and some of the practices around different eras of what would be considered traditional clothing, just to sort of help people not reproduce mistakes that have been made in like Western made products that try and recreate a kimono or hakama, so the pleated pants and the idea of like sexy hakama and women wearing like these silky pants with nothing else. It's like you realize you have to wear a full leather kimono underneath hakama.
what?
They don't stay up otherwise. Yeah, so just trying to train away from that, show where some of these references from Japanese pop culture come from and how they've been changed in Japanese settings, and why, as a Western producer, you are not as allowed to do these things with fashion and fantasy. But there's, yeah, plenty of work out there. I'm really interested in Northern clothing traditions. Northeastern Japan having lower access to some types of materials,
Yeah.
like during the Edo period and some of the more recent historic periods, cotton being imported into Japan was a luxury product. And so it was harder to find in the north. And mostly what the north got were scraps from the south. If anyone's familiar with boro and sashiko, so patching and quilting techniques, and indigo dyed blue cotton, and all of that largely developed in the north. And it's fascinating and beautiful, and something that's also kind of being reclaimed within current society as a sort of ecological practice and all about sustainability and responsible living. But yeah, boro is really cool.
Oh,
Clothing,
boy.
good stuff.
Clothing is good, actually.
Yeah. And yeah, so sadly, can't share the clothing stuff, but I am working on a database of all of the Jomon Dogu appearances, so it's going to take me a while, but at some point I will a website that has images and explanations of every single dogu that I have identified so far, and
Amazing.
then hopefully become collaborative in that if people know of any that I haven't identified out of the 420 or so that I have now,
Yeah.
we can start contributing to that and keeping track.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I've gotten myself very thoroughly into trouble here.
Stock.
Because I don't think I have a lot of solutions here to get rid of some of these materials that are... Yeah, I'm stuck between two spike pits, so I think I just lose.
Kaboom.
Kaboom. Because unless if this detonates, I'm totally stuck. Fly the person across with wind. Oh, that's not something I was aware of. Good to know. Alright, so we'll do that. And then we'll have him turn around. We'll fly him across and I'll dig fast. It almost worked.
Go.
It almost worked. Ow. Come on, try again. There we
I'm
go.
gonna go grab a bit more water. I will be
That
right
sounds
back.
awesome. Go get water. Again, everyone, if you need to stand up, stretch, any of that stuff, this is a great time to do it. Because we're just playing a minigame, and being a minigame, there is not all that much exciting to say, but it is sadly plot necessary, so here we are. Well, that's not good. I am completely out of... Oh good, he actually wound up exactly where he needs to. Is it truly a minigame if it's plot necessary? I think so. Circle him to speed him up, that's a good point. Because we do only have 6 seconds left. Got it, with 1 second to go. Alright. I mean, I love when we're able to get exactly... I love when we're able to get exact references like that, AC and Johnny. Like, it's... It's pretty rare that we manage to get unbelievably precise references. But I'm very happy that we did. But yes, also Thistle Vixen, thank you for helping with the gameplay, because clearly I am not remembering my things. Alright.
You did it. I'm
We
guessing.
did it. But with
Yeah.
exactly 0 seconds to spare, so win's a win. Also, everyone is doing terribly, so that's fun.
Sounds like history.
Exactly. Though in this case, it's caused by super cursed poison, which is not.
Oh, I
Heck,
see.
heck. Maybe I can draw a lily pad there to be okay. Why is this game measuring happy? They translate it as praise, in the game, so it's our level up currency. So I'm able to spend a bunch of it in order to get more health, more ink, all that stuff. Alright, and now that we've solved that problem, let's go check in with this definitely real queen. Good boy points, exactly, because we are a good dog. And we quantify that very precisely.
Good boy points.
It's the standard thing for a historical Japanese capital to have an epidemic or be on fire. You? Really? Really?
Epidemics and fires are just every capital. Pack people in, everyone gets sick.
Yep.
Benkei.
Aye, aye. Living sword lies in the depths of Lake View. My boy. One of the very many literary references that shows up in Oz, like every quote-unquote Japanese game that I have seen needs to have a Benkei reference.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Widespread across East Asian media in general.
Yeah. I think I see Yamato no Orochi more often. Well, we have to go buy him a fishing rod because he's poor. He's being poor.
Yeah, he's a monk.
Yeah.
He doesn't have money.
Yeah. Luckily, by the power of murdering yokai, we have lots of money. Wait. Video game logic is fascinating sometimes.
You gotta love it.
The weapon dealer, Yeah. Let's see if he's here. He's got it here. Oh! We're almost rich enough.
Interesting.
For the seven branch sword.
Vengeance slip.
Let's get this first. And then if we can sell enough to get the better things. Blinding snow. I take it that must be the one we need. Let's just buy both of them. We've got the power. An herbal medicine. I have a feeling we're gonna need all of those real soon. And then we will try and sell a bunch of stuff to try and get our historically fancy sword that's completely useless for just about anything.
Perfect.
I have 4 of those. Okay, we have plenty of cash. Perfect. There's that, and off we go. It's useful for ritual, probably. You know, fair enough.
Probably.
I don't remember. I do not remember the name of it, but I do know that this is another very, 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 very famous sword that shows up in all sorts of media, including Ace Attorney, which was an oddly deep cut.
And it's like the fire swords in Zelda.
Yeah.
I am not familiar with weapons. That is something that I have not invested a lot of power.
That's fair.
historical weapons of Japan
Yeah,
or otherwise. I go for more cozy vibes of people eating and sharing food.
I appreciate that. Uh, I I also do not typically do weapons, because I really, uh,
Other people do it.
exactly. There's so many people doing it, I don't have to. And
Yeah.
apart from, oh, the Shichishito. Thank
Yeah.
you, Raxa. Uh, and, there's so many people
Excellent.
who do weapon history. Wolfie, Niram, who also sometimes shows up in chat. And they're all very good at it and do very fun stuff. And
Excellent.
I don't. That means I don't have to, and I can focus on literature and things that I find. Oh, heck.
Uh-oh.
Things that I find more interesting.
Yeah. History of cooking knives.
History of cooking
You know?
knives. Actually, a very, very fun thing. You?
And you could say, like, just about anything can be turned into. But historical weapons, not my jam.
Nah.
Cooking knives, that's in the realm more of chipstone. Not really what I do.
Fair.
It's something I understand and would maybe consider incorporating into bigger things, but man, I got a lot to deal with just with groundstone.
That's. Yeah. A mudfish?
Fish.
Oh, Gobi.
No.
Okay. Oh, big fish now.
Wow.
Oh man.
A goby. Ooh.
Whoa. That's a very big fish.
You got this.
We totally got this.
Yikes.
Oh. Some kind of eel, yeah. We'll see what it actually says. It's probably just gonna call it a living sword. Oh, well that's horrifying. Cutlass fish, the living sword. That's not helpful. But it is horrifying, so, congratulations, Benkei now has 1,000 swords. One of those
Amazing.
swords is a fish, so I don't know.
Did you... Are people familiar with their study? And I don't remember what. Some archaeologists wrote a paper about testing whether frozen feces could be used as a cutting instrument or used
Yes.
as a knife.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that.
You know, turning everyday things into weapons, like fish and
Yep.
poop.
Yep.
Someone got funding to do that.
That, I mean, they sure did.
The conclusion of the paper was that it doesn't work.
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure. Oh boy.
Yeah. What is the Frenchman doing here? I hate him so much.
Listen. Question.
Mm-hmm.
Because they've been coming up on and off. Well, okay, yeah, the Ainu. For the Ainu, it's one of those things that's tricky to find in English. There are some really interesting books and resources. One thing to look into, I don't know what their English presence is like. I'm going to type it out, but in Hokkaido recently, they opened the National Museum of Ainu Culture and Cultural Exchange called the Upopoi in Hokkaido. This is a great place to start looking. I want to go there so bad, and it's an interesting look at current Ainu relations. Some people hate it because they think it's placing Ainu in the museum as if it's somehow culturally stagnant or dead, and others see it as a great opportunity to communicate Ainu culture and establish that it's not going anywhere. It's part of a revitalization effort. It's also intersecting with repatriation. So it's the storage location of a lot of Ainu remains that were taken throughout history, have now
Ooh.
been given back technically to Ainu peoples, but this is the temporary storage space until they can find specific communities that they came from.
Ooh.
But yeah, Upopoi is also going to, I hope, act as sort of an official repository and launching point for anyone interested in learning about the Ainu. It's hard to get to, yeah. Most things in Hokkaido, especially Ainu related, are a good drive away from major cities like Sapporo and Hakodate, but that's one to look at. There's also a couple books about the colonization process that the Ainu experienced, and Brett Walker wrote a great one about the relation Ainu and colonization, as well as the eradication of Japanese wolves, the indigenous wolves,
Yeah.
and how that all goes together. So that's called The Conquest of Ainu Lands, and it's an attempt to look at Japanese and American historical documents, but from the perspective of Ainu people rather than the people who wrote the documents in the
Yes.
first place. Also
That
looking at things
sounds
like
fantastic.
creating maps as a way to control peoples, treating the Ainu as if they're part of like the local wildlife rather than as people that need to be addressed as humans. So equating them with things like wolves and inconvenient things that need to be eradicated. But that's a really good place to start to look at the political historical situation. And then there are Ainu authors and artists who are out there making things happen. And wow, my brain is not helping me right now, but the Yukar, there's one written by a woman growing up in an Ainu village. Sorry, it's Saturday. My brain's like,
That's
minimal
all right.
information for you.
Exactly.
But yeah.
That is completely fine because, you know, minimal information on weekends is good. Work-life balances are healthy.
Yeah.
But,
I need to find the guy who kind of spearheaded a lot of the resistance revitalization. I will get to that. I will be searching for that. But
amazing.
yeah, horrifying colonialism. And one of the things that I initially wanted to work on when I was starting my master's was to archaeologically compare the early frontier zone within Ontario and the process of colonizing and the interaction zones that formed on a daily basis, not just within the larger colonial program.
Yeah.
And comparing that to what happened in Hokkaido, because I saw a lot of similarities. But then partway through some of my literature review, I discovered that the similarities are not coincidental. It's because American advisors were brought into Japan to consult on how to colonize the eradicate peoples. So methods were straight up taken from North America to Japan in order to do that. And some American West consultants who are like industry and agriculture specialists were brought in to make that happen.
That checks out.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep looking.
No, I can just skip the line. While we're looking, we also have a couple of redemptions. We have, firstly, a compliment for, you know, is there something that we think the game does particularly well? Or, Yeah, just something about the game that we really like, besides it being utterly gorgeous, because that was the
Mm-hmm.
last one. Um, but then the other thing is we have a more in-depth research time. So hopefully, or wanting to learn a little bit more about native carnivores, so wolves and bears, in
Mm.
Jomon period art, and insofar as we can talk about belief.
Okay.
So, small, easy questions.
Could start with what we like about the game.
Yeah, that seems that seems easier. Which is, you know, I do like that we're getting to see different places, even though this game is generally very strange. Um, and
I
I do like that it's a blend of stuff, right? I think, given how much the mythology and mytho-history accumulate in stages over time, yeah, don't worry about Lady Isabel. But, uh, right, seeing the visual layers kind of stack on each other in the same way that the mytho-history kind of stacks together is very good, and I do just like that a lot.
I think it does so much, and in some ways, it's a blessing and a curse because it brought a lot of very specific historical and archaeological references to a very wide audience around the world, to the point where a lot of people represent like kitsune masks, the fox masks from festivals, as Okami masks, which is an incorrect use of the imagery, but
Yeah,
it really did bring so much. And it's a good jumping off point for a lot of people to figure out more. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
still trying to find the name of this one person I'm trying to think of, which I will keep doing. But if you see me looking down and being distracted, that's what's going on there.
Sure. Oh, good. Land of the Gods. In the meantime, they gave us a lore tablet, which I'm sure is, um... It said that a holy realm called the Celestial Plane is situated in the heavens above Nippon, where we mere mortals dwell. This legend is ancient, and no one today knows of or speaks of it. However, I have been trusted with the knowledge of this sacred place. One day I was visited by a man who wove for me a strange tale. He said unto me, "The Celestial Plane has met its end." Well, that's bad. He relayed the horrors of this destruction to me at great length. His talk was unbelievable, but his eyes showed no reason to doubt. I only wish I had the fortitude to recount his harrowing tale here. I'm afraid my brush cannot bear the heavy burden of that sad fate. Since the celestial plane was destroyed a long time ago, the god's spirits, rendered homeless, still inhabit the earth. I try not to think such thoughts when I gaze up at the sky. Yeah, Dagamagahara being destroyed is a bit of an issue.
Why
Prayer
is
slips?
this?
Okay. But yeah, we also have some stuff on animals. But I don't even realistically know where I'd start to try and find
Yeah, I'm gonna put
like,
that aside for now because I'm drawing a, but
yeah.
there's plenty of stuff now, especially in English, to look at Ainu culture and us also Ainu resistance to colonialism and ongoing effects. But I can go back in and I saw a few things that I should address. So the idea that the Ainu are the remnants of the Jomon period is definitely an idea and definitely something that has contributed to racism and colonialism. So,
Yep.
what's odd is in recent years, so people may not be as familiar with the Jomon Ainu connection as they used to be, because in recent years, especially with genetic research, ethnic Japanese people have heavily gravitated towards their ancestors and reclaimed them as sort of their natural origins, both culturally and spiritually. But for the longest time, until maybe the late 1980s, the Jomon was seen as irrelevant to Japanese history and not part of Japanese culture. And instead was seen as the cultural origins of the Ainu, or indigenous populations, which, according to historical records and also in history itself, were the ones who kind of lost the whole game of state development and colonization. And there were attempts to say that the Jomon are represented in the Kojiki as the peoples who are pushed back and eradicated by Emperor Jimmu, or Ten. And no, one of the early emperors who expanded the Japanese empire. And so there are a lot of people saying that, this happened during the Yayoi period. And so archaeologically, what we expect to see is the Jomon being pushed back and destroyed by the incoming Yayoi, and any of the Jomon that survived transformed into the Ainu people. And the idea that the Ainu then were essentially unchanged since the beginning of time. That they were a static people, they were backward, that they were so ancient and the lesser of peoples and cultures because of how they lost to the spreading Yayoi, and this was all disgusting and went unchanged for a very long time. But then, start seeing that no, both genetically and culturally, the Jomon are connected to Ainu, ethnic Japanese, as well as Nansei peoples, and that there's interactions with the continent and other islands. And things are a little more complicated, but that idea for a long time that the Ainu and Jomon were connected was a way to essentially support socio-political ideas about inequality and colonial process and assimilation to remove Ainu peoples and kind of put them through a similar process, say like the residential schools, where they're discouraged from using their language and practicing their culture and traditions. So anytime we see someone leaning in too hard to comparing Ainu to Jomon, we have to be like, hold on a second. There's a really icky history surrounding that, and we know way too much now about everything. So we also know that there's 2 to 3 different archaeological cultures that come between the Jomon and the Ainu. We know generally when current Ainu culture and society first kind of appears in the historic and archaeological record, they're a more medieval culture, so 1200s. And complex lives, a lot going on. They were not hunter-gatherers, and now we also know that the Jomon were not strict. This has a lot to say about concepts of cultural and political complexity. So lots going on. So anyone who's saying the Ainu are remnants are buying into a very old and inappropriate rhetoric.
That I know that was a thing, right? That I saw crop up in my research a couple times. Is like, oh yeah, people used to think that, Dogu figurines, right, the big goofy eyeballs on them, must be Ainu snow goggles.
They don't have them. That's like Arctic peoples of North America things. Lots of interpretations about Shikoki Dogu eyes and connections to things. And Arahabaki as a name, but also as a concept, also comes from Tohoku, so northern Japan. Arahabaki is thought to have been a deity, old, but no one knows how old or exactly what they. And one of the primary records of Arahabaki and where we get this connection between Arahabaki as a deity and dogu, especially Shikoki dogu, is from a forged document. Someone
Oh,
created a
heck.
fake historical document about religion and rituals and different daily practices in Tohoku in the 1970s. And it's a well known forgery hoax.
Heck.
But this is where someone connected Dogu to this Arahabaki character, and now it gets perpetuated through things like Shin Megami Tensei and this Arahabaki idea.
No, that sounds pretty much exactly right. There's a lot of like nine times where I see 19th and 20th century stuff just kind of get perpetuated.
Absolutely. But yeah, before I get off on too many tangents, I will talk about the wolves and bears
Yes.
and native carnivores, both in art and religion. So, wolves and bears are very much connected to the Ainu. So are owls and some forms of falcons and hawks. They are similar to things that we would see in North America. These animals represent characters and human traits in a broad narrative sense of making sense of the world, but also just explaining cosmology and how the world is as it is. Bears in particular are the most important for Ainu religion, and some people may be familiar with like Ayomante, or the sending back ceremony of taking a bear cub and raising it within the village, and then in a massive ceremony they would kill the bear after it had been raised almost like a person, as a giving back to the Kamui, the gods, and the environment and the world in general. Bears are also thought to be sort of the primary ancestral character to the Ainu, and yeah, big deal. Wolves are important, but I don't know if they sit anywhere in particular within Ainu religion and mythology. They probably do, but the relationship between the Ainu and the wolves, it also has to do with dogs and that colonial process. When Japan was making its way into Hokkaido, it wanted to use Hokkaido specifically for ranching, so raising horses and cows. There wasn't a dairy or beef industry within Japan until 1869, the year after the restoration began. And
man.
with the Meiji. This is partly why things like cheese is very still much a specialty product in Japan. It's only really made in Hokkaido, and it's a relatively recent thing. And beef being eaten as a regular food is also from the Meiji era. Some first record of people eating beef is from the 1860s. So otherwise, we're sticking to a lot of Buddhist and Shinto ideas about not eating animals, so a lot of vegetarian stuff going on. But when they started ranching, they found that were a problem because they would prey on the herds or harass them. And they also made this a way to kind of roundabout way patrol the Ainu peoples themselves, who heavily relied on hunting dogs. And the colonial government started to lump dogs and wolves together. And what started out as an effort to eradicate wolves as a natural threat, they then extended into making Ainu people relinquish their dogs to the government, which broke a lot of traditional hunting practices. But yeah, it was like a step from getting rid of the wolves, and then, the next thing is the dogs, and then also disrupting Ainu lifeways. And so wolves in some ways have become symbolic of undoing some of the colonial garbage. Wolves were completely extinct in Japan after these efforts. So indigenous species of wolves in Japan, both in Hokkaido and in Honshu, both entirely eradicated in the 1800s. And there are now attempts to reintroduce similar species of wolves, like the North American gray wolf, back in Japan to try and recreate the pre-colonial biome in some ways. But yeah,
Oh man, yeah, no, that. I mean, that would be great if we can make it sustainable. But yeah, that's a really rough history.
yeah. So wolves have become symbolic of some of that process and symbols of the depths of colonialism and the damage that it does. But I would have to actually do some research to see how wolves tend to be represented in Ainu culture.
Sure.
Wolves within like Shinto and Buddhist stories tend to be almost like guardians. So if you think of the wolves from Princess Mononoke,
Yeah.
that is the general idea. They're not good, they're not bad, they're not evil or anything. They're kind of just there to point out human folly in a lot of Japanese stories.
Sure.
And they only ever punish people who do something that would be considered morally or spiritually incorrect, like damaging the forest, abandoning children, murdering someone, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Those are good things to punish people for, though, because those are bad
generally,
things.
yes. So, yeah, wolves and bears definitely have deep meanings and will show up in art and religion, but different ways and different meanings.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered anything.
I think that did. The just the idea that they're not really interchangeable is something I think that is a case of being very different in historic Japanese cultures compared to European ones, because I think a lot of folks like popular idea comes out of Vikings, where Berserker and Ulfhednar are in many ways seen as interchangeable. And so you have, like, deep ancient wolf and bear cults operating at the same time. So, hearing about those differences is really, really fascinating.
Oh, people in the past.
Oh, people in the past, just being the worst. We love them, we also hate them.
Yep.
Now you remember how Vikings and buffets are associated in Japan? AC, what? How? Oh, yeah. Anyway, though, I am
I
looking
can
at the
see
time,
that.
and we are kind of running out of. I think we are kind of out of time. We
We
didn't
didn't
get to
get to
actually.
Himiko.
We didn't get to actually meet Himiko, but we learned the fact that we think she's terrible. This game is deeply
Yeah.
suspicious of her, which,
And that's a thing.
regardless of whether that's
saving-
justified or not.
I have some stuff to say about that.
Uh-huh.
Like
Please
the
do.
appearance and uses of Himiko through time. I was kind of holding on.
No, let's wrap up on there, because even though we can't see her because this game takes so long to reach anything.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Himiko gets built into a lot of pop culture, and I think I said it already. It's one of those really unknown parts of the historical record, so there's a lot of freedom to do whatever is needed at the time. And in the records themselves, it's kind of just like Himiko's the ruler. She does magic stuff. Talk to
Yeah.
her, whatever. No real judgment about, say, like a femme ruler,
Yeah.
especially being in charge of a nation or anything like that. But over time, like perceptions of what women should be doing or can be doing in Japan has influenced how Himiko has been interpreted.
Sure.
But also Osamu Tezuka, so the creator of Astro Boy and lots of other manga and anime series. Uh, One of the people who started the trend of painting Himiko as evil or somehow bad. And this was partly related to his distaste for government and authority. And so he saw Himiko as the first ruler of a Japanese state as being representative of the rise of authority and authoritarian. And so depicted her as absolutely unhinged, like really totalitarian. He has scenes where she morphs into Hitler.
What?
And then morphs back into herself and starts to look, so using World War II references to kind of suggest where he thinks that she is this overbearing, outrageous, outdated, manipulative, crazy lady who has kind of gotten in power. And this is something that then comes up over and over again. Himiko being the sort of deranged and untrustworthy evil lady character that can be a villain or also like really erratic and hard to understand. But then we also have Himiko as Amaterasu, sort of the head of the pantheon, the provider, the origin, and she sometimes gets used as that mother figure. So, yeah,
that's
weird
rolling
overlap
into
with ideal woman and
two very different directions, neither of
two
which I
very different
particularly like.
things. Yeah, and then getting all wrapped into origin of the imperial house in particular, and then people being really not okay with the imperial house anymore, emperor worship, and so Amaterasu and Himiko both go through transformations yet again and get used for different things.
Yeah, that's one way to sum it up. Different things. Various.
So yeah, it's always interesting to see what version of Himiko you're going to get.
Yeah.
And looking at where some of those ideas come from, because it's certainly not in the original.
Yeah, I mean, the original doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
Which is both good and bad.
And I forget exactly when, but I'm going to guess somewhere between the 80s. Himiko also became like a symbol of the working woman as being a female ruler. So just a lady just getting things done.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was not where I thought that sentence was going to go.
All different things that she could stand for. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a diverse set of potential references.
Phoenix is the manga series where Tezuka goes through Japanese history through the perspective of people trying to gain immortality by getting a phoenix feather and how that looks in different periods. So he goes back kind of to the Jomon, but really the Jomon Yayoi transition and picks up primarily with Himiko.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that's something to look into.
It's interesting though. I don't remember. Is she in the Kojiki? Because I feel like they just like don't mention her at all in that.
No, she's only ever mentioned in the Chinese texts.
Yeah. So the ones that I otherwise expect are the source of the mytho history. She is just fully an insertion into that narrative.
Yep. She's been picked up. And also her successor, I believe, was her niece, or also another female ritual specialist that then takes over for her until being replaced by a dude. And that has been partly overlapped with the story of Amaterasu and Susanoo.
Huh.
But yeah, weird things going on there.
We love mytho history.
Love it.
Sure.
But yeah, not in the Kojiki. More of a popular figure than anything else, and a long search to actually find evidence of her and Yamatai. Particularly pre-World War II when they were really concerned about the origins of the Emperor and the Imperial line.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
Yamato and all of that might be a topic for another time.
Yeah, that's gonna, I think, have to be a topic for next time, just because I think we are fully out of time for today. I know we kind of committed to about 3 hours, and that's where we are at now.
That's where we're at, yeah. And we
So
are nowhere near Himiko.
we are nowhere near Himiko. We are nowhere near the end of this game, but that is okay. I've got a feeling we'll be seeing her again. That's just a hunch. Just a
Just, yeah,
small
you know,
hunch.
maybe.
Yeah, yeah. It has been just an absolutely fabulous conversation. So thank you so much for coming on. It has been a
No
joy and a
problem.
half.
Like I've said, you give me the chance to talk about Japanese stuff or pop culture, I'm kind of all over it.
Amazing.
It definitely helps to have questions though, so I appreciate chat.
Yes, Chad, you have been lovely as always. Do you have any final questions? I guess, Chat. If you got them, let's get them in now. Uh, but in the meantime, do you have places people can find you, things you want to promote? I know you're on Asians Represent. You've
Yeah,
been over there in the podcasting realm, but if there's anything else you wanna promote, talk about, feel free.
sure. So, yeah, I can be found in the Asians Rep Discord server. I'm also a moderator in that space. So, anyone who is interested, that is a great place to be if you want to talk about games, pop culture, Asian representation. You do not have to be Asian to join, though we do ask that people who do not identify as Asian or Asian diaspora do not monopolize the space. And that's partly what the moderators are there to help you with. But you can find us there. You can find me on Twitter primarily still. I do have a Blue Sky account. I can type those out in the chat before we sign off. I'm also in the Archeo Gaming Collective Discord server, which is where I have seen you, Adam, before.
Yep.
So if anyone's in that space, I am also very much within Archeo Gaming arenas. So
Perfect.
that is a thing. But yeah, I will quickly my Twitter handle is Starchiologist, which is a combination of starch and archaeologist.
It is a fabulous portmanteau.
But I realized that it's hard to I didn't create it in thinking that I would ever have to say it out loud. But yes, that is where I am on Twitter.
Amazing.
I refuse to call it X because
Nope, it's Twitter.
get out of here, it's Twitter.
Exactly.
And I don't remember what my Blue Sky is, but I
It
can
looks,
drop
it
that
looks
in.
like Harasakima may have you already covered.
Oh yeah, there we go. And yeah, I often on my Pawnopples, which is just way back when they did a meme when the internet was young, where they had all of the different foods that were incorrect pronunciations, apparently based on kids trying to say foods for the first time. So Pawnopples was pineapples.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just found that hilarious. So I use
That-
Pawnopples on a lot of platforms. On Twitch, I am Kurorisu, which is a black squirrel. So I am very bad at branding myself because I am inconsistent all over the place. But Twitter is the main place to find me and what I'm doing.
Perfect.
Discord, if you have it, I am in Asians Rep as well as Archeo Gaming. You will
Amazing.
find me as
Amazing.
Pawnopples.
Pineapples. All right. So I think that does it for us for today. So once again, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Thank y'all for being part of this. It has been an absolute joy. Next time we come back on stream, we'll be moving on from Okami into Age of Empires to move forward in time to look at the Kofun and state formation as we start to build up towards the Imperial Courts and the giant gap in popular media that is the Heian.
Yeah. You know, it was peaceful. How do you make a game about people being peaceful?
But there's so much court drama. There's such a
Yeah,
good
but-
social intrigue game. But no.
Yeah.
No. Oh
America
well.
don't care.
True. All right. So that does it for us for today. So I hope you all have a very good rest of your evenings. And yeah, we will see you next time. All right.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right. And thank you quickly to all of the patrons and to everyone who followed, subscribed, and rated during this. It is an absolute joy to have you here. I hope you all have a good rest of your night.